Okay, so following the successful creation of our Angular project, you should see something like this with green ticks saying packages installed successfully, and it knows that our directory, the solution folder, is already under version control, so it skips the initialization of Git, which means we're going to have a Git repository that's going to contain our API code and our client-side code. So let's take a look at this inside VS Code, and if I go to the folder explorer, we can't use Solution Explorer for this. Our client app is not going to be registered with our .NET solution folder. So ignore Solution Explorer for this. And inside the dating app folder, then we're going to use the file and folder view to manage the files inside our client-side project. And let's close this stuff down as well. But we're going to focus on our client side. So first of all, let's make sure our Angular app is running and see what happens when it does run. So I'm on my second tab here. Let's just clear this window. And we need to cd into our client folder. And then we can execute the command from Angular to run our application. And we use ngserve for this. So type in ngserve, press return, and I fall over because I've still got this running on a test application. So I'm going to say no and ignore the errors there. Just like in our other projects, we can only run one thing at a time. So in the background, I've gone and stopped that other one, and I'll try again. I'll say ngserve, and this goes ahead and starts our Angular application. I'll come back to what these files are soon, but let's just make sure things are working. So I'm just going to copy the URL, http localhost 4200, and head over to the browser, and let's just paste in that URL, and we're provided with the Angular welcome page, and congratulations, your app is running. Great, so we've now got an Angular application, but let's take a look at some of the components that we get with our template, or what's responsible for displaying this output that we see here. So inside VS Code, let's take a look at some of the files inside this client project. Now, one of the things that we did, and this is from Angular 16 onwards, I think, is that Angular used to be modular in its architecture. And we would have in our source folder, in previous iterations of Angular, we would have an app.module file. And everything that we wanted to use inside our Angular project, any components that we created, they would all be added to a modular or a module file. But nowadays, and the default when we create an Angular project, is that we create our components as standalone components. They no longer have to be part of a module. And when I say module, let me just go back to an older version of the code where it was using the modular architecture, and this is the previous iteration of this training course. Inside the client folder, inside the source folder, inside the app folder, we would have an app.module.ts file, and everything that we created would be contained inside here, and we'd declare all of our components, we would import the things that we're using, we would specify providers, and we would bootstrap our root component, the component at the top of the tree, which would be the app component. Now, this fundamentally changed in Angular 16. We can still use Angular modules and they're not going away, but when we create a new project, the default now is to use standalone components instead. And you'll notice that inside the app folder, we do not have an app.module.ts. So things have changed, and I've had to re-record pretty much every Angular related lesson to accommodate the fact that the new way of doing things in Angular is to use standalone components. You may still see code out there that's using Angular modules. That's fine, that will still work and continue to work. But when you create a new project, you're probably going to be using Angular standalone components. And that means that when you use something, instead of adding it to the Angular module file, you simply add it to the Angular component that you're using. That's the big change here. And it does have some benefits. Certainly in terms of only loading what we need to load for each different component, rather than loading everything that would occur inside an Angular module file. But anyway, let's go back to talking about what's contained in the project and why are we seeing the output that we see inside our browser here. So we're creating a single page application. Our single page is this index.html file. We've got standard looking HTML here, except for one thing. We've got something that's not strictly HTML, and it's this here, this app root. And inside the body of this HTML, this app root is being loaded up and displaying the content we saw in our browser. We've also got a main.ts file. This is what's output into our terminal and contains effectively our Angular application. And if we take a look at the main.ts file, then this tells us that we're bootstrapping our application with the app component. And if we take a look at what the bootstrapping of the application function requires, or does, then this bootstraps an instance of an Angular application and renders a standalone component as the application's root component, the component at the top of the tree. And because the standalone architecture is completely changed from the modular architecture, then the root component passed into this function must be a standalone one and should have the standalone true flag in the component decorator config. Okay. And what we also pass to this function is some options, an application config as well. So we've got our app component here. This is the app component TS. And we've got this component decorator that's got the standalone flag set to true. And each component we use has various properties that are specified in this component decorator. That's what we call these things with the @ symbol here. It has a selector. How do we select this component for our usage? And this one selector is app root, which matches what we're using inside the index.html. This is how we specify an Angular component in an HTML template file, is we use its selector like so. And if we go back to the app component.ts, this is a standalone component, which means that anything that it's using has to be imported in this imports array. We've got router outlet there. We're not using routing yet, but we will do, so we won't touch anything inside there. We've also got its template URL. This is the HTML template that this app component is using, and if we go and take a look at this file, then this one's going to be quite busy. And this is what's contained, or what's used in the output that we see inside our browser. We've got lots of CSS, we've got HTML, and there's lots and lots and lots of lines of code, all 336 of them, to display this simple looking HTML file here, which seems quite excessive. Anyway, we're going to delete this. This content is a placeholder and can be replaced. So we're just going to say Control A and delete everything inside this file. And then we're just going to create an h1 tag. And we're going to take a look at how we use Angular code inside an HTML template. So inside our app component, we have a class property called title. And the title is set to client. And we can access class properties from an HTML template. And the way that we do that is via something called interpolation. So we open two sets of curly brackets, and then we can specify title inside there. And that's using the property from our Angular or our app component. And if we go and take a look at the browser, we can see that we've got our title, which is client. And Angular does come with good hot module reloading. So if I go back to the component, and let's change the title from client to dating app, and we save this file, this will be immediately reflected in our browser without us needing to refresh the page. The hot module reloading in Angular is very good. So we'll be able to see those changes take place effectively immediately. And if we take a look and just right click our browser and click on inspect. By the way, I do use Chrome for all of the demonstrations here. Chrome is an excellent browser for development purposes. Maybe you've got a preference for Firefox or Safari or even Edge browser, and they've all got their own developer tools. I typically use Chrome for development, and that's what I'll be demonstrating. So I would highly recommend using Chrome as well for testing our browser functionality. If we right click and inspect, we can see what the makeup of the page is, and if we expand the body tag, then we can see inside here that we have our app root component. And we also have some script tags here, this polyfill.ts and this main.ts. But did we see those inside our index.html? Well, let's take a look. And we do not see any script tags inside here. So effectively what that means is when we're running our application and we can see that we've got these files that are being output, then this is being injected into our HTML by Angular server when we run our application. These files, these are effectively residing in memory. Our browser is not capable of interpreting Angular code. Our Angular code has to be converted into JavaScript, and then our browser can understand the JavaScript code and display what we need to on the page. So the Angular server in the background is taking our code, compiling it into JavaScript, injecting the JavaScript files that it holds in memory into our index.html, and that's why we see what we do in the page. So a couple of other things to point out. Each of our components, we've got a component file. I'll refer to this as a component file. We've got our HTML templates, which I'll usually refer to as our components templates. And then each component also has its own CSS file as well, where we can write code just for that particular component. And each component also can have its own test file. Now, sorry, but I'm not covering testing in this particular training course. So we will not be creating test files with each component that we create. It will detract us from what we're trying to accomplish on this training course. So testing, I'm actually going to just remove this from the files and folders as we're not going to use it in this training course. What we also have is our application's configuration, and anything that we want our application as a whole to use, we can specify inside this providers array as part of our application config. And we've seen where this is used. This is used inside the main.ts. But when we do need to do something on an application-wide level, because we no longer have the modular architecture of Angular, now we can use this app config instead. We'll come back to this as and when we need it. And we also have a routing file here as well. And when we come on to routing, this is where we're going to specify our different routes for use in Angular. We also have a styles.css, and we can use this for any global styles that we need to apply to multiple different components. And a couple of other important files inside our application. We've got an angular.json, and this provides configuration for when we build our application, and also when we are serving our application as well. We'll be coming back to this when we want to make changes that need to be specified inside here. And certain things, if I just scroll up a bit, then when we include external style sheets, such as the styles.css, then we'll be adding them into this angular.json file. Another thing that we have inside here is the package.json. This contains all of our dependencies for our application, and all of our Angular related things are listed inside here, as well as a few other important dependencies as well. RxJS, we'll talk about that soon, and the way that Angular handles asynchronous code. It does use RxJS, it does use these things called observables, but we'll talk about that a bit later. And we also have our TypeScript configuration here as well, and we're going to be utilizing TypeScript in strict mode, as this gives us the most amount of type safety for our buck. And if it's too strict for us, we can come back here and configure this if we need to, but generally speaking, this tells our TypeScript compiler how to compile what we're writing into JavaScript, because our browsers also do not understand TypeScript. They need the code to be compiled into JavaScript. So that's just a very brief look at some of the files that are involved in our project, or as brief as I can realistically make it. And what we'll take a look at next is adding an extension to help us write Angular code. So if you're using VS Code, that's coming up next.